Good evening, everyone. This is KZFR Write.onair 90.1. Hope you're all having a good evening tonight. This is going to be a cool show this evening. And first off, I want to say, Write.onair, we take submissions from anyone and everyone. Any type of writing. We've had lyricists on the show, poets, novelists, authors of any type. So if you want to be on the show, you can do so at write.onair@gmail.com. That's probably the best way to contact us. I can't think of any other one, but maybe Facebook. Natalie's pretty on top of that. She's pretty good at it. And speaking of Natalie, how are you doing tonight, Natalie?
I'm great, thank you.
Well, we have Joe Murphy with us tonight. JL Murphy. How's it going?
Pretty good. Thanks for having me.
This is going to be an awesome show. I want to read an intro because we got a bona fide intro here. So I'm going to do it. JL Murphy was born in the mountains of California, and upon finding fiction, began writing at a very young age, becoming obsessed with the make-believe. He began poorly illustrating several stapled together stories that were not much more than monster tales. Ever since Murphy scribbled those first words, he found out that he could not and would not stop putting pen to paper. Over the years, he had written 3 different manuscripts focusing on creating organic characters that grew and progressed through vivid worlds and complex histories. Murphy's debut novel, Elegy of the Shade, is also the first book of a 4-part series based in the post-apocalyptic world of a burnt paradise. Other works of his include a variety of short stories, standalone novellas, and massive epic fantasy series that is slowly being fleshed out. He intends to release all of these projects as fast as he can write them. And I'm super excited to have you here tonight, dude. This is going to be awesome.
Yeah, thank you. I'm really excited to be here myself.
Yeah, so before the show, we were talking a little bit about you as a person, as a human being, and I thought your story was amazing. So tell us a little bit about yourself, and then we'll segue into your book after that.
Well, I was, as it says in the bio, I was born in the Sierra Nevadas, and I grew up in the middle of the woods, 7 miles away from a town. So me and my little brother, we didn't have anything to do but make believe. So when I was growing up, my dad would constantly be reading, and I remember I used to see him reading these big, thick, these whopper books. Yeah. And I'd always ask him what they were about, and he'd be like, oh, they're really complicated, because once you actually get old enough to read a book, you start realizing how much information's there and how hard it is to explain that. But I ended out, kind of following his steps, and I started reading, Lord of the Rings and The Wheel of Time, just lots of high fantasy. I was a nerd. Let me put it that way. I was a nerd. It was very socially awkward for me.
I sympathize completely.
But I started reading, these novels, and I just started writing. And I started writing at a really, really young age. My first real memory of it would probably be around 5, and as it mentioned, the monster tales. It was literally just a poorly drawn story of monsters eating people. That was it. That was the entire story. So
and that's what we're airing tonight.
Yeah, exactly. So and over the years, I went through a lot of different experiences. I quit writing for 5 years, because I was at this point after the first 3 books I'd ever written. And when I say books, I mean just scribbled notes, and they were not very good. So I was like, oh, I'm going to quit writing and go experience things, because that's like what I really need. Is I need to go experience things. And I went through a lot, and I started writing Elegy of the Shade about 3 years ago, and it took about 1 year to finish the novel. And probably about halfway through, I went sober, and I quit drinking and doing drugs and what have you, which helped tighten up the writing. I will say it does make things a little more difficult at times, but yeah. Writing's always been there. It's been a therapeutic release for me since I was very, very young. It's the way I process just about everything.
And you had said you wrote most of this book while working, right?
Yeah. Elegy of the Shade, the first draft, was written while I was working full-time at a restaurant as a line cook. And so essentially I'd be waking up before dawn, working all day. And then the moment I was off of work, when I would go to the bar, Duffy's downtown, and I would immediately sit down and start writing. Immediately, and I would write for 10 hours straight, and I would end up being up till 2 in the morning, then waking up at dawn again. interesting time.
So you're like the Raymond Carver of Duffy's.
I'm not going to make any claims to that.
I'm going to.
But,
You had some kind of release there recently, right?
Yeah, we had a release party, and I donated a book to the bar itself because, you know, the novel was born there. It was written there. I mean, me and my content editor, Kyle Kirk, we edited it there. The release party just had to be there. And there'll be more events coming up soon, but there was a great turnout, and I'd like to just say thank you to everyone who did come out that night. It was amazing. The show of support was just, it was incredible. It was very touching.
I loved seeing that they had an event like that for a writer in our community, and that was why I personally wanted to get you on this show and just hear your story. So just props to you, one, on getting sober, two, on focusing enough to complete. I am looking at a full book here, basically the size of a Bible, and it's beautiful, beautifully written. I'm supposing we're going to hear in a minute here, but also just the cover and the fact that you've self-published this, and you've got actually a hard copy of it right here in front of us. That's wonderful.
And before we dive into it, I want the title again and where we can find it, where we can get a copy of this book.
Absolutely. Also, I'd like to just a quick shout out to the guy who did the art, John Posey.
Yeah.
He's actually probably going to end up doing the entire 4-book series of A Burnt Paradise, which is incredible. He does amazing work. But the name of book 1, which is for sale on Amazon, is Elegy of the Shade.
Wonderful. Perfect. Well, with that, I think we should dive in. Let's get to your first piece here.
Yeah, sure.
I'm super excited for this. I'm a big fantasy fan myself, so anytime people come across, especially like we get a lot of poetry on here, and I would say lighter on the fantasy end of things, so this is exciting for me.
They swirl about me, thousands of the dead, some smiling, others silently screaming, yet all is curiously serene, almost as if an incomprehensible orchestra played for the ages. The notes meant not for us, but for the vastness of the infinite stars that speckled the night, to inspire primitive animals that bayed to a moon in primal urge. The song is beyond us, and yet defines completely our dance. The notes are long, eons long, and all in this place, down to each molecule that shiver in their incomprehensible realms, heed its melodies. The light of beginning, the glowing symphony of creation itself, shines faintly from the swirling shadows. It's flickering, nearly incomprehensible, fathoms below me. The dead swirl, and the universe spins. I am deep within the cardinal apex of the river Styges, though I am present only in dream, more a phantom than the dead around me. This place is known to those of the fall as the pinnacle, the center of the ever-rekindling fires and energy of the universe itself. I can see the eyes somewhere in the chaos. I find peace in them, and something that I have searched for since childhood. I breaststroke through the whispering tides and see a woman dancing in the radiant, shimmering depths. It is her. I know it, and I strain to swim faster, desperately paddling at the symphony's oblivion. The lantern of Karen the boatman, worn and ancient with sharply accented sides, almost steeple-like, appears through the swirling spirits. The light it shines is radiant and oddly green-tinged. I am so close. Without warning, I am hauled upward by unknown force, with the lantern's shimmering green flame. A howl, defiant and enraged, swells within my breast, but those eyes bid me not to, and I do not scream. My hand reaches, with wallowing mortality, for those cobalt orbs that enchant me. I weep as the lantern takes me back to my own mortal existence. My tears are sorrowful and longing as I see my son, as wretched as it is.
Anything to say, Natalie?
Well, I'd read the synopsis of the book on Amazon prior to coming on the show, so I'm guessing that that's from the main character, Thomas Riley's point of view, or?
Yeah, that is a dream sequence
Yeah.
in chapter 2. It is in Thomas's viewpoint, although I would say that he is only a fellow main character to the person that this phantom he was dancing with.
Mm-hmm. Is the phantom the shade, right? Is that the eyes that
Well,
he keeps dreaming of?
Yes. The eyes are...
They're on the cover, by the way, which is beautiful.
Um, the eyes are something that Thomas Riley has always sought for, and it's his first memory.
Okay.
And it's something that's always brought him peace. And he's led a very violent and very dark and very tragic life.
Yeah.
And it's something that he thinks of when he needs peace. And the other main character just so happens to have those blue eyes.
Oh, okay. So it's like you found them, or?
Well,
I'm like, I
and
gotta know more.
You'd have to read the book to
okay.
find out, but I can
No.
say that he speculates on that when he does meet the other main character, who is Eliza Moore.
Eliza Moore, okay.
And when he does meet her, Eliza kind of knocks him off his feet, as it were. So it's definitely one of those things that, as much as this is a very gritty and very dark book, it truly is a love story that is wrapped up in a very brutal level of reality and conflict. And the reason why I put in these very, very grisly details and things are very, very disturbing is so that when you had these moments of introspection with the main character, or his interactions with Eliza, or how she behaves towards him or the others, or any form of kindness and compassion, is so that you realize that there's another option available outside of violence. Now, of course, it's a fiction book, so there's got to be action. There's got to be movement. And, this is a book meant for adults. It's not meant for kids. And the reality is, I'm not going to candy coat anything. It's meant to be harsh. Also, it's post-apocalyptic. I mean, you're not exactly expecting hugs and
Roses and
what
sunshine.
have you when the world is ended.
And I don't know. I really do like the style you've got going there. The juxtaposition between like a really heavy, just raw, painful apocalyptic world really does make the loving parts shine through, I would say. I mean, I haven't read the book, but I understand what you're going for already, and I think that's pretty solid.
I mean, I will say this much about the two main characters. Like, coming from being the writer, there's the argument of your characters are, you control them. They're, you know where they're going. You make them do what they do. I don't believe that is organic writing. I have issues with these two main characters because they'll sit there and have a philosophical discussion about books for 10 pages. That is a real scene in this novel, and we had to cut it down because we were sitting there like, I mean, they're not doing the plot. They're not going, but it's a fun conversation. But come on, guys, we gotta
snap it.
So for myself, the way I always write them is I don't approach them like, well, the characters need to go here. It's, what are Thomas and Eliza doing right now? And I'm kind of just there narrating what they do. So more often than not, I'm usually just as upset as everyone else when Thomas does something stupid, or Eliza is, a little too cold towards a situation.
I want to point out that writing style, because there's usually two that I see that kind of rise to the surface. Is I'm the puppet master, and I make everything happen how I want it to happen, and I have everything orchestrated, versus I make these characters and then I let them live. And I've found some really cool instances of both, but I probably lean towards what you're doing, where you have the characters there and all you're doing is narrating what's happening, like kind of following them through their journey and whatever they're doing. That's a pretty cool style.
Oh, it's difficult to write because there's only so much planning I can do. And so essentially I will set plot points. I just don't know exactly how Thomas and Eliza will end out getting to them.
I'll get there. Man. And I want to touch back. Oh, go ahead, Natalie.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say, I want to touch back on your writing itself. It felt like taking a bite out of like a sandwich. There was so much detail there. It was just juicy. It was great. The references you made, all the descriptions. I think a lot of times we get people who will omit things because they think it's too much. You did not, and it was wonderful. It was so good hearing all that. That entire piece was just rich, is the only way I can describe it.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, it's the way I've always written is Not on the basis of too much or too little, but how do you paint a scene in someone's head without giving so much detail that all of a sudden you have like a page describing a chair, and in which case it's like, what are you doing? It's a chair. Just tell me there's a pillow on the chair and the person's comfortable. I'm
Yep.
set. But a huge part of what I did with Elegy of the Shade and the Wastes, where this world of a burned paradise, are the cultures, because it's 53 years after everything has ended. So societies have reconstructed themselves, their city-states, and so a part of these introspections that you have from this first-person perspective is the idea that Thomas is a very philosophical individual. So, of course, when he's seeing that scene, he's going into this very deep, primal depth within himself. But if you were writing it from someone else's standpoint, it's like, I'm in the middle of a swirling haze. There's dead people. There's a pair of blue eyes kind of coming at me. It's weird. I'm kind of uncomfortable, actually. There's a lantern coming down. What is going on? But for him, it's this deeply borderline spiritual dream.
Yeah.
I love that you pointed that out, because it's sort of reflective of the characters' thought patterns, that they would go into these deep, rich descriptions, and so it affects your writing style. So maybe I wonder if you wrote somebody who was a little more shallow, a little less of a deep thinker, it would be just this little tight, compact little book.
Well,
maybe you're like influenced by the spirits of the characters you write.
Absolutely. I mean, I think when it comes to being an author, every single character does hold pieces of you. Everyone I meet, everyone I interact with, that I eavesdrop on their conversations, have had pieces in this novel and all the coming novels and all the stories I've written, because for characters to feel organic, you have to make them be human, which means they're going to have mistakes. They're not going to be perfect. And if there's one thing that Thomas and Eliza are not, it's perfect. And it's very important to me that that comes across. I mean, a great example, what you're asking about, the maybe characters who are not so deep. In book 2, you get other viewpoints. And some of those characters, despite the fact that they're incredibly intelligent or ruthless or what have you, will be much more straightforward. Mostly because I tried to take into consideration with every character that I write in this world, what is their education level? How intelligent are they? I mean, are they just intelligent by the standard of the world? Did they actually get schooling, which means there had to be money involved that put them there because, the world ended. These things are not, they're not so common. It's not like you go to public school. It's like you grew up in the city of Kingston and your family was poor. Guess what? You're a thief, or maybe you became a prostitute because you have to make ends meet. Or maybe you're dealing drugs, or you're getting involved with the slave trade because it's incredibly good money and it's lucrative. So a very large portion of the book, to make it believable, is it visits corruption through power and authority, because that's it's a very real thing. As much as it's a fiction book and it's a fictional world, a lot of it is me making observations on the society we live in and how incredibly unsustainable I feel it is.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you, because I had read there is a place called the Office of Social Harmony, and I was wondering about how much of your viewpoints in the real world are affected in this book, and what that had to do with how you were titling things, like maybe the names of the characters, the city they're in now, where they're supposed to be at geographically in present day, as opposed to in the book. Where is Kingston, and how much of that is reflective of your personal viewpoint in real life? Well,
to answer the end of that question, I never reveal where in the wastes, where on Earth the wastes are. When I made the maps for the books, I borrowed coastlines from all across the world to make it just to upset people, because, well, I mean, what can I say? I'm a cretin. But when it comes to organizations, this world, the book started as a short story. It didn't start as a novel. It started as this weird one-shot story that I had started, and then just another chapter followed, and another chapter followed, and I didn't know the name of the main characters, and all of a sudden Eliza came about, and all of a sudden Thomas came about, and their names just kind of happened. Okay. I didn't make them. I didn't like go through an online name generator like, okay, these two, they named themselves. They very much so did. I didn't know who Eliza Moore was, and it was actually rather funny. It's a fun story. A very good friend of mine, Lexi, used to bartend over at Duffy's, and at the time I was still drinking, and I was about halfway through Elegy of the Shade, and I was working on this scene, and I'm writing, and I killed my glass of whiskey, and I dropped my pen on my notepad, and I was just like stunned. I was floored. And Lexi comes walking over, and she immediately starts refilling my glass, and she goes, "Joe, you look surprised. Like, what's going on? What's wrong?" And I looked at her. I was like, "When did it become a love story?" So that just kind of happened, and all of a sudden I was like, "Well, who's Eliza Moore? What's she all about? Where's she from?" And she's a soldier, and she's not just a soldier. She's a war hero, and she has all these deep intricacies about her that I got to discover. And through these characters really developing, the world of the Wastes had to evolve, and it had to become alive. And I'm a neurotic world builder. Again, the novels I started out reading and what have you kind of drove it in my head that it's like, well, if the world's not realized, then what's the point of reading? And I'm a total map like nerd. I get really, really heavy into maps, and I make all my own. And I blame Tolkien for this, for the record. I completely blame him. But when I get into when I got into making the cultures of the Waste, I purposely wanted to make them feel not only real, but that you could see them, you could smell them, you could feel them. So the very purpose of the book is some of the descriptors will be very, very vivid or a little blunt at times. And the reason why is I want the reader to feel like they're walking through the streets of Kingston. They can hear the sounds of like water bleed off. And is it water? Maybe it's urine. No one knows. So the idea was to make the world feel as believable as possible.
Believable and tangible for everyone reading it. That's cool.
Very.
It's beautiful to see Tolkien's influence on your book, like physically that you have maps in it, and then also just to hear it in what you've read and the fact that there's this river that he's a ferryman, right? In a dream state.
Well, Thomas is what's known as a shade, and they work for this other, we're going to say other dimensional being that they all kind of view as a god, known as Karen the Boatman, which really is just a moniker that this being took because it's something the human mind can comprehend. It's from Greek mythology. It's, I'm a huge mythology fan. I love it. I get really into it, and in these books, they are purposely written to be rereadable. Now, of course, if you're just going into Elegy of the Shade for like, I just want to read a book, like
beach reading,
you're gonna have a great time doing it. You might be disturbed, but you'll have fun. You'll get through it. But if you end up developing a fascination with the world, I purposely loaded the entire thing down with Easter eggs. No character is minor. Every single thing is involved in their own plot, their own story. Which for myself wasn't so much on purpose. It wasn't like by design. It's just what I believe should go into a fictional world. Is that you don't, it's not just that there's someone selling roasted were-rat on the side of Salvation Lane. It's like where is that guy from?
Yeah.
Is he from out in the Wastes? Is he from Kingston? Because if he is from Kingston, he's a citizen. But if he's outside the Wastes, the only reason why he's in there is because he's being allowed a 12-hour pass. So it's a whole world.
Yeah. Well, you're very thoughtful in your process of writing, and I just want to give you so much credit for what you've done and even what you're continuing to do. So this is part 1 in a 4-part series?
Yes.
And I want to say, too, I don't know if there's a word for it or not, so I'm just going to kind of say it, but there's a thing with musicians where the high-end musicians spend years learning all the chord progressions, all this stuff, depending on what their musical instrument is, and they get really well adept with like intelligence-wise. They just a mass amount of intelligent power to memorize that stuff and understand it. But when you get up to the very high levels of it, it almost becomes a discovery type of thing. And I've heard interviews of musicians where they're like, I don't actually know where the music is going. Sometimes it just takes me there. And your story where you just described, where you're like, when did this become a love story? It gave me that kind of same feeling, where you've spent so much time just willfully thinking and making this world and spending so much time on the detail and making the Easter eggs and all that stuff, that you've gotten to the point where now it's kind of making itself. You're kind of just narrating it and following it along. And that is, in my personal opinion, a really amazing key feature for good art and good writing. That is super cool.
I mean, I can honestly say that when I first started Elegy of the Shade, I thought it was going to be one book. And halfway through, I was like, oh, it's definitely two. The plot's too big. But, that's not a big deal. By the point I had finished book one, by the point I had finished Elegy of the Shade, I realized that it was easily 4. And it's remaining at 4. I want to make this very clear. That is a promise. It is not going above 4. However, in the world of A Burnt Paradise, there are 3 more planned novels with another character who is introduced in this story, and a standalone novella that will have a collection of other stories with it. Right. Mostly some background stories that I just really want to write, like such as, why is Eliza Moore so emotionally scarred? Why?
There's more depth to the characters.
Yes, I mean, because for the record, I try and find ways to make my characters, I'll be blunt, suffer, because, they're characters. I mean, that's what you do, right?
What is life?
Life is not easy, and finding Eliza Moore's Achilles heel took a year and a half. She was just a powerhouse. There was nothing I could do to stop her. And she just, every situation that popped up, she was just like, I know how to deal with this. Thomas, follow me. Let's go. And so that's another one, is I try and I tried very, very hard. And my content editor and I took a very long time rewriting section after section to make certain that it came across that Eliza Moore is a very strong woman. Yeah. And I really, I have a issue with weak female characters. I do not enjoy them as a reader nor as a writer. More often than not, I kill off my weak female characters because I'm like, and the weak male characters as well. I want to make this very clear, but there's even a line in Elegy of the Shade where Thomas and Eliza go to raid a slaver lair. And, she's like, well, Thomas, they're going to have guns. You need to stay here. And he's like, no, I'm going with you. And she's like, you do not have a weapon. You will get shot. Like, absolutely not. And he's like, no, I've been with you this far. I'm going in with you. You're also going to need a damsel in distress to rescue, right? So I'm your damsel.
Wow. That's one way to put it. Well, we're actually reaching the end of the episode. These things always go lightning fast. And I know, Natalie, you had a really cool question to ask. So I want to go ahead and put you on the spot for that right now.
Of course.
Are you talking about the self-published one?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah, this book is self-published, and I wanted you to share with our audience how it was you went about doing that. Demystify it.
Well, I went through Amazon.com, which is where you can find Elegy of the Shade as well as my author profile. Yeah. They have an incredible program that you go into, you submit your manuscript. You can also load it up as a Kindle electric read and what have you. It's nowhere near as intimidating or complicated as some might have you think. It is not easy by any stretch. They have some standards that you must meet. Yeah. And if you really do want to get published, first of all, you need to finish your story, which means every day you write. Every single day you sit down, regardless of how you're feeling, especially if you're feeling depressed or angry or upset, take that and throw it into your pages. And if you're feeling nothing and you don't want to write, buckle up, Buttercup. Sit down, crank out 10,000 words. Crank out a paragraph. Just do a paragraph. That much a day. That's all it takes.
Yeah, just keep progress going. Yeah.
The reality is, it's just one word after another, and it gets hard. Like there have been so many moments I wanted to stop and just quit and walk away because I don't think it's very good. But The reality is, if you are writing a story and you do want to write a book and you want to get that kind of work released or self-published or what have you, or maybe you're just doing it because you need to get it out, then you need to sit down and actually throw in the hours, because it's not something that's going to happen overnight. It's going to require diligence. It's going to require you, frankly, losing a lot of sleep, and you're going to, there's a reason why writers are pretty generally accepted as being very eccentric, and we're all a little off. Well, you spend 10 hours in a fictional world and then try and talk to someone about, what special do you have on tonight? I don't know what that means. Yes, that. Just give me that. So,
Well, I think the quote of the episode for tonight is "Buckle up, Buttercup." And possibly the quote for the book too, going into it.
Why not? Why
Yeah.
not?
Yeah.
Right?
Well, we're at the end of the show. Thank you, Joe. This was awesome.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
thank you so much for having me.
It goes so fast.
Congratulations.
Yeah, we'll have to have you back again to talk about more of this book and your up and coming works. So, with that, this has been Write.onair with Joe Murphy. You can find his book Elegy of the Shade on Amazon.com.